serious physical illness. Some people are genetically more predisposed to depression. Childhood loss and trauma can be a contributing factor. Temperament, worldview can affect our depression or cause us to have depression. Side effects from medications can cause depression. And people who have never been depressed might doubt that it happens to others. We know that. We've seen that. Spurgeon saw that people would laugh at that melancholy. Lloyd Jones saw it. Packer saw it. And you can hear it right now today on the internet between MacArthur and Piper. We know that there is something to it. And so what can help alleviate depression? Medications are helpful for some people, and there's nothing more morally or spiritually wrong about that. One lady that Lynn and I are counseling now, who has terrible struggle with, what's that thing, the lung condition, COPD. She's down to, I think, like 20%, 15 or 20% lung capacity. When we go to her house to counsel to help her, we can only stay an hour because she literally can't take any more than that. She's that weak. She's constantly monitoring her oxygen level in her blood with a little thing on her finger. And she asked us, am I taking this Xanax at night when I have these panic attacks because I'm just a spiritual wimp? And our answer was no, not in the least. You are to us a spiritual hero. You really are. Your faith is real. Your faith is genuine. Your struggle is real. So we're talking about the lung condition, but the Xanax is not touching that lung condition. Doesn't have anything to do with it. We're talking about anxiety. In the fear of waking up at night and thinking, can I even still breathe? Am I going to be able to breathe? And she feels panic. In that condition, she's taking the Xanax, and she thinks it helps. She says it helps. She also wonders if some of the other things she's experiencing might be side effects from it. So it's kind of good and bad, but it's good, and it helps. And no, she's not a spiritual wimp for taking that. Not in the least. Sometimes depression can come from or for no apparent reason. And that's the same thing we just saw through just a brief little interviewing of pastors. Counseling can help, no doubt about it. Counseling can be very helpful and a key part of help for people with depression and any of these other psychiatric diagnoses that we've talked about. Our worldview can be changed by Scripture and Christian theology. And remember the Harvard guy saying, part of what affects your depression is your worldview, how you think the world ought to work and how it does work, how you think it works. That can help. Scripture speaks directly to depression, and it speaks to all of those conditions. It doesn't say the word narcissistic, whatever it is, disorder, which is also in that book, but it talks about those symptoms all over the place. Look out not only for your own personal interest, but also for the interests of others. That's exactly what someone with that diagnosis does not do. They are only focused on their own personal interest. And that's part of the problem. But that's a symptom or a description of it. And yes, Scripture speaks directly to that. Maybe it doesn't use the word narcissistic because that came later from the Greeks. Well, it could have been in the New Testament, but it's not. But nevertheless, the same kind of symptoms Scripture does speak to. So our God is the God of all comfort. That's what he says. He is the God of all comfort. He is near to the brokenhearted. That's what he says. And he hears our prayers. He hears our prayers. And he wants that person with that struggle to know his nearness as they're good, to know that peace, that rest that Jesus offers. And fellowship in Christian community can help lift our depression, and that's huge. That is such a huge thing that we can offer as endeavoring to be a safe place so that we're not saying things that are going to actually hurt other people who are struggling, but we're going to come alongside and encourage. We don't have to understand all of it to come alongside them. They don't understand it all either. You don't have to understand it. Usually people that are struggling like that, they don't expect, from friends and loved ones at church and family to understand and know. They just want someone to be there. That's one of the symptoms of that borderline personality disorder, is a fear of abandonment. That's a horrible way to feel. It's really, really difficult. And yet at the same time, another symptom of that is that their interacting with other people tends to push and drive people away. And so the very same person who struggles with the fear of being abandoned tends to treat other people in a way that just drives them away, unless they're just really relentless people and stick with them. The fellowship, the community, the people of God can come alongside. We as church can be to people something that no single counselor ever can do, and something that no psychiatrist in 15 minutes, 3 or 4 times a year, can ever begin to do. We can be their day, we can be their night, we can be close, we can be by phone a long way away, but we can be a real presence in people's lives in this kind of struggle. And the Lord will and does and will use that as a help for depression and for any of the other of these symptoms or diagnoses that are out there. So that brings us to the end of a discussion on depression, and where we probably ought to stop. I know I'm past the hour, but we've been talking for about an hour. So let's stop here and come back, and we will wrap up. Does that sound good? Is that okay? Just go ahead and take a short break. So let's come back at 11:30, and we'll finish up.
Just very thankful for David and Lynn coming to share their story and how God's meeting them every day. But so we may have to, I was telling him, we may have to bring him back in April. I don't know if y'all would even be interested in that. But even if we did it on a Saturday, we'll set aside just a Saturday. And so he'll probably go to about 12:15 then after that. So lead on.
Very good. All right. So there was one question during the break that I thought I would mention a little bit. This is hard to do in a short span, but I do think about this a lot. All through here, I've just been using the word counseling, and somebody was just mentioning that, there are a lot of different things that means. And the truth of it is, every one of you are a counselor. You counsel people, probably most every week, maybe most every day. You see somebody in a situation and you say something, and what you say is probably intended to have some kind of influence in what they do with what you said. Or maybe by what you don't say, you're counseling someone. They're saying, oh, well, David didn't even say anything when we talked about that. He must not think it's a good thing to do. So in those kind of ways, we all counsel people all the time. We are doing that. But clearly, even though that's the case, there are different kind of what they call models of counseling. And I don't want to go in all the technical nuts and bolts of this, because you might not want to know that. But it's just enough to say that I think the way the state of Georgia is set up maybe is a good example of the two, to me, biggest differences. And so in Georgia, you can be an LPC, a licensed professional counselor. That means you took the same test that everybody in all the other 49 states took. And if you pass that test and you do a certain number of hours under supervision of somebody who's already licensed, then you can get your license too. So that's one kind of counselor that the state of Georgia recognizes. Another, the only other one, there's two, is pastoral counseling. So if I came here and told you that I'm a professional licensed counselor, that would be against the law in the state of Georgia for me to say that. So I'm careful to say that I am a pastoral counselor. A pastoral counselor means that you have to have at least a master's of divinity or a master's in theology. Those degrees take twice as much as any LPC ever went to school. They take years. They take 4 years on most all cases for the MDiv. And so that Master of Divinity focused on counseling and applying these other subjects to understanding counseling is what I studied for 4 years, full-time student for 4 years to get that. Then the other professional counseling courses that I took are over on the license side, and I forget how many of those that I've done and how many hours was in that, but it's a good many. But those are kind of two different ways, the license by the state or the pastoral counseling. Now, the reason that I took the coursework for both is that I was thinking, well, I could take that license test, I could work under the supervision, and then I could charge people's insurance company for counseling. That's what we were thinking about doing. As things turned out, not very long ago, you really started to hear a whole bunch about same-sex attraction. And if you go on the American Psychological Association website and you look that up and you see what they have to say about it, they're basically saying, licensed counselor, you better not be messing with anybody with that in the sense of trying to influence them one way or another, which is just crazy. I mean, I just don't even get how they could require that. And there's at least one attorney here. There's something that that recently I heard from Southern Seminary. Who's our president there? Al. That Mueller says on his little thing that he does every day that whatever the American Attorney Association, whatever it is, I forget the name of it. But he was saying that they were coming up, the association itself was coming up with these rules or laws so that an attorney practicing could not in any way use or be influenced by anything to do with certain of these kinds of issues like same-sex attraction, like the whole gender identity thing. And that's like the Legal Association tying its own self by the foot to me and saying, well, we won't even allow these intellectual contents into our heads in our practice of law. Come on. And so in thinking about that kind of thing in the American Psychological Association and in the state of Georgia, saying to me, licensed counselor, if you want your license to still be good, whatever you do with someone who comes with gender identity issues, you better stick with what the American Psychological Association says, which is you better not try to influence that one way or the other. You better not do anything to try to convert them or change them from one view of their gender to another. And so for me, I thought, I don't really want to be bound by that. So we chose not to go that way. We chose to go the route of pastoral counseling, which, thank the Lord, in that state, that's another legitimate way to practice counseling. So to me, that's the biggest distinction in all the different kind of counselings you hear about is either a state licensed and governed and regulated kind of counseling or one that's not bound by that but is bound by certain academic credentials and training and all that stuff. So hopefully that helps a little bit. Because counseling there's all kind of different models within this and even within pastoral counseling, there's different ways that people come at it. And I can't go into the whole thing, but that is a topic for another day because it's very interesting and it's helpful to know if you're seeking help for someone and you think counseling would be good, where do you go? Well, you want to know what's some criteria to understand how's this person actually going to counsel. And there's some helpful information. I think we put a link on our website, but on the ccef.org website, How to Find a Counselor will give you some nice criteria to use that helps kind of sort through what kind of counseling would they get. So hopefully that's enough to be helpful on that question. So we've talked about depression and used that as a kind of a sample. And so this is another thing that we really need to know.